basically at the same time I was driving the startup for the first 4 or 5 years of the company, I had a serious cocaine addiction, which I hadn't planned to have. And it was it led me to a crazy double life that most addicts will be able to relate to. And they have this term called high functioning addict. And it basically means or an alcoholic or an addict. And the way I like to describe it is you're high functioning in terms of you do perform your functions very, very well. But in my case, I was also performing them while I was high. So it's a double meaning for the term.
Driven by purpose, fueled by passion, my words got power, my thoughts have action, motivation, stay gracious, that's greatness, be audacious, motivation, be audacious, innovation, be audacious, inspiration, be bold, motivation, be audacious.
Greetings and salutations. Welcome to the Audacious Living Podcast, where we explore the extraordinary journey of life and empower you to live your best audacious life ever. I'm thrilled to be here today, broadcasting from the ancient ruins of Tulum, Mexico, a place rich in history and energy, reminding us that even in the face of storms, we can rise, rebuild, and renew ourselves. Now, today we're going to draw on an analogy between the resilience of Tulum and our personal journeys, just as these ancient ruins have stood the test of time, reminding us of the beauty that can emerge from the past. We explore how addiction can affect anyone, often stemming from underlying issues. Now, just like the structures here, our lives may crumble, but with the right support system and the willingness to ask for help, we can rebuild. You see, recovery is a journey, one that is never too late to embark upon. It requires humility, self-awareness, and much like the respect we have for the history that surrounds us, by sharing our stories, we can inspire others and provide hope, just as the enduring spirit of Tulum inspires us today. I'm totally excited to introduce our guest, Gordon Lownds. Gord is the co-founder of Sleep Country Canada and the author of the memoir, Cracking Up, From Rising Star to Junkie Despair in 1,000 Days. Gord's mission is to help raise awareness about addiction and recovery, emphasizing that it can happen to anyone and that it's never too late to change your life. His journey through addiction recovery is just a testament to resilience and the power of community support. So now that we've got you all set, let's dive into this compelling conversation with Gord. Enjoy. Hey, Gord, thank you for joining me here today on the Audacious Living Podcast. I appreciate you for taking the time to be here, my friend.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you.
Yeah, no, this is good. You know, much time is spent here on this podcast, encouraging individuals to live that best audacious life that we talk about here always and often. And a big part of that is understanding that the path that we're on, and we oftentimes use an analogy of like it's a journey, right? We're all on our own individual journey, and on that path, where it's going to have its own set of challenges, obstacles, roadblocks, what have you. And in order for that journey to continue, we need to find a way to keep going and find a way, whether it's up, over, around, through that boulder on our pathway, to get to the other side. Because on the other side, oftentimes is where the greatness lies and the richest rewards. And we just have to get there. And sometimes we can't see them because of what's in front of us. But it's continue to have that audacity to push forward in the face of these challenges. And so I think that's a kind of nice segue into your story. You've written a book called The Divided Brain, which we're definitely get into that and get.
Actually, that's not the title of the book. So, it's Cracking Up.
Cracking Up. Okay. So where did I get Divided Brain from?
I don't know.
Okay. Well, I'm glad. I am glad then. I am glad. So the book is called Cracking Up.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, and it's the subtitle is From Rising Star to Junkie Despair in 1,000 Days.
Got you. My apologies, Gord. I'm glad you corrected me on that. Don't know where I got that from, but anyhow, nonetheless, we are here cracking up, and we'll certainly get into that. But I think what would be helpful for our audience is if you kind of introduce yourself, let them know who you are a bit, because I think that provides some really good context and sort of talk about your journey and what's got you to the point that you're now, that you put all your stuff in your memoirs and wrote a book.
Yeah. So I'm 77 years old. I'm hopefully retired. Um, my claim to fame is I was one of the co-founders of Sleep Country Canada, which turned out to be a huge success. Um, and the nub of my story is that in the startup of that company, um, basically at the same time I was driving the startup for the first 4 or 5 years of the company,
Mm-hmm.
I had a serious cocaine addiction, which I hadn't planned to have. Um, and it so it was it led me to a crazy double life that most addicts will be able to relate to. And they have this term called high functioning addict, and it basically means or an alcoholic or an addict. And the way I like to describe it is you're high functioning in terms of you do perform your functions very, very well. But in my case, I was also performing them while I was high.
Mm.
So it's a double meaning for the term. But I started my business career basically working in the carnival business when I was 15 years old,
Mm-hmm.
and I think your disrupt the norm concept probably describes most of my life. So I had a very unconventional career. I ended up getting well educated along the way. I like to describe the different moves I made in my career as basically being opportunistic. When I saw an opportunity, I said, "Oh, that's interesting. I think I'll go this way or that way." So it was never a single path forward.
Right,
And so it
right.
was very serendipitous, the things that happened to me that allowed me to excel in business. Um, so in 1994, we started Sleep Country Canada in Vancouver with Christine McGee and Steve Gunn were my partners.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said, what happened was I fell into a rabbit hole that was just unbelievably deep
Yep.
and life threatening. So so I ended up going to treatment. Like a lot of people who go to treatment, I relapsed after I got out of treatment. I
Mm-hmm.
went through another period of addiction, and then finally I got clean and sober in March of 1999. And I've been clean and sober ever since. So that's a nice extended period.
Congratulations.
And when I finished my time in treatment, my question was, do I go back and continue running Sleep Country Canada, or I do something else? And I had to admit to myself and to my partners that I couldn't guarantee to them that I would stay clean and sober, because addicts and alcoholics relapse all the time.
Right.
And I didn't want to put them through that stress. So I resigned from the company after 5 years. And within 2 or 3 years after that, I started another company, which is Listen Up Canada, which is a hearing healthcare business.
Mm-hmm.
So I ran that for 12 years. I retired in 2012. And now I'm living on Vancouver Island and peacefully. And life is good.
And you didn't relapse as you thought you was a possibility that might have happened.
Yeah, as I said, I relapsed once after I left treatment.
Okay.
And I was really disappointed in myself because they told me that was probably going to happen. And I said, well, it's not going to happen to me. And it did. So, I'm human just like everybody else.
I love it.
And as I said, but since March of 1999, I've been clean and sober, and I've been living
Beautiful.
a much more humble, but also useful life in terms of, trying to do the right things in the right situations.
So Gord, first I want to really congratulate you for a number of things. Quite honestly, like the humility in which you share your story and you own every piece of your story is extremely powerful. I also love the honesty that you had with your partners. Like, hey, this may happen, and as a result, I'm gonna step away, which is something that it's not normal. People would still stick it out. No, I can do this, and there's nothing wrong with that approach, right? Like, hey, I just talked about not giving up and fighting through adversity, right? So there's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with that approach, but being very, very honest with yourself around, what the likelihood is, and then the impact and the potential impacts it could have on others, which
Yeah.
I think is much to be proud of. And again, the manner in which you own that story is wonderful. And what I'd like to find out from you is, it sounds like there's oftentimes I guess a tipping point, if you will, right, where things are spiraling out of control, and we don't necessarily always realize in the moment. We're just kind of going through. We don't know how bad it is until we get to that point. We're like, oh, this is bad.
Yeah.
What was it for you? When did you realize that we're in a good place?
So I from the first hit on a crack pipe in 1996 until I finally got clean and sober, it was the lights went out.
My apologies. One quick thing I should have mentioned before. I recently installed this motion detector, and it's driving me crazy because I can't adjust it the way I want. Not that I can't. I haven't figured out how to adjust it. So
Yeah.
the lights go out. Please ignore. I'll go over, wave my hand, and it'll go back on, and it's fine.
No problem. So from the first hit I took on my first experience with drugs was basically smoking crack cocaine in 1996 at the age of 48, which is just insane, on its own merits. And within 6 months, I knew I had a problem. Within a year, I was shooting up cocaine, which was just, I was, on a fast track to the end of the world, much faster than most addicts would have experienced.
Right.
And I would say 3 months before I went into treatment, I had a huge challenge maintaining the charade that I was okay. So I kept things going at work. Life was good, but my drug addiction was a secret. No one knew about my drug addiction. Not my family, not my friends, no one in business. So it was a huge challenge to sort of manage that charade. It's like a high wire act, like daily, trying to keep the whole thing going.
I'd imagine it's exhausting too.
Yeah, like it was absolutely crazy. And so what happened in May of 1998, I knew I couldn't keep up the charade anymore, and I was full of guilt and shame. I didn't know what to do, and I wasn't willing to admit that I had a problem. So I took a leave of absence from the business. I said, I've got some health problems. I need a couple months off, and I'll be back to work on Labor Day. So basically 3 months. And in that last 3 months, I thought I could get my act together on my own if I didn't have any of the stress of work and all that other stuff. And the using became worse. So I was totally isolated. And my bottom was basically, for days and days on end, probably for the last month or two of my using, I would get high and stay high for 24 to 36 hours at a time. Then I would pass out, literally. I would wake up 12 hours later, and I'd sit and look at the track marks on my arm and say, I really have to fix this, this situation.
Right.
The stress of trying to figure out how I could do that, basically just said, I just don't want to think about this anymore. So I'd get high again. And so, my bottom was going through this process on a daily, weekly basis, and sitting there looking at track marks on my arm. I'm a successful business guy. I'm trying to shoot up cocaine, and I can't find any veins that are, had collapsed some of the veins in my arm from shooting too much.
Right.
And it was basically a choice. Do I do an overdose intentionally just to fix the problem, or what else? And the problem with what else was I didn't know what the what else would be.
Right.
And what happened is, when I couldn't make it back to work on Labor Day, like I had promised, 2 days later, I finally phoned my partner in Toronto, and I said, I can't come back to work. I've got a serious drug problem. I'm a cocaine addict. And I was expecting him to go completely, off the rails, yell and scream and do all that other good stuff, because I'm sitting here feeling completely guilty, tons of shame.
Yep.
And his response was, "Wow, I'm really sorry. What can we do to help?"
Yeah.
And the last thing I expected at that time in my life was compassion from another person. So anyway, he got me into treatment, and life went on.
We all are worthy of compassion, Gordon, and I'm glad to hear that that was a difference maker for you because that really speaks to the power of compassion and the difference in making people's lives. Um, I want to talk about sort of success, if you will, for a little bit, because many people see that as a straight line, like you start here and it's a rocket, and off you go, and you're successful in life. And
Yeah,
I think even in your life, you'll show that sometimes there's a dip or a dramatic fall, if you will.
yeah.
And that's part of the process. I'm curious, as you were kind of, if you reflect back, what were some of your sort of hardest moments during those low points, and what kind of kept you going?
Uh, I think the common theme that I think about in my business, I've been resilient, in terms of business, in terms of my personal life, and I think the resilience, got me through the drug problem because I just refused to die. And even though I was giving up, I wasn't really giving up because I was still going, if you know what I
Mhm.
mean.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it and it's not that I had a will to live, but I think I had a fear of dying.
Right.
Um, and part of the guilt and shame of that was I had a 17-year-old daughter at the time. So, what was that going to do to her? What was I going to do to my business partners? What would it do to my friends?
Right.
And I couldn't reconcile that whole situation.
Gotcha.
So I'm resilient.
Okay. That's it. That's a great one. I think a great one. Yeah, actually, one of the things I was going to ask is what was the impact to family and friends?
Yeah. So, as I said, my business partners were very understanding. Uh, I think they were relieved when I told them I couldn't come back to work,
Okay.
because then they wouldn't be under the stress of what's Gord going to do next, kind of thing.
Right.
Um, my daughter and my ex-wife, I was divorced at the time. When they found out, when I basically sat down and told them I was a crack addict, my daughter completely lost it. Because up until then, I had been like, I was the ideal father, right? And we did everything together, and she had, not on a pedestal, but she thought I was a great guy, kind of thing. And so she was devastated, said she never wanted to talk to me again. And my ex-wife said, get out of my life and, go fix your problem, kind of thing.
Right.
But so within a year, I got clean and sober, and I dedicated, my personal life to fixing the issues with my daughter. And they explained to me in treatment, they said to rebuild the trust, that you lost with your daughter, it's going to take probably a lifetime. And what you have to do is commit to being there for her and never, ever, ever letting her down ever again. And
Mm,
so that was, I think, the prime driver in my personal life is rebuilding the relationship, and making sure that it was healthy and always being available, when and if she needed me, kind of thing. And my business partners were understanding. They said, we hope, hope things, turn out for you.
yep.
We don't hold anything against you. And the irony of all of this is within 6 months of me getting clean and sober, no longer working in the business, we sold the business. And so all of a sudden, I'm a recovering addict, with upwards of $20 million sitting in a bank account. As my psychiatrist said, like I've never seen a recipe for disaster as big as this one. So that was a challenge in and of itself.
Sure. Of course it was.
Yeah.
Course. Oh wow. Oh wow. I found it interesting that part of the advice in terms of that commitment to your daughter is that you never let her down ever again, kind of thing, because that's top of bold promise. That really is just the nature of human beings and who we are. We're going
Yeah.
to err. We're going to be flawed. We're going to make mistakes, and so that's a really significant bold promise. Was that something hard to commit to, or what did you have to
No,
think about
it wasn't hard to commit to. It was challenging to do.
that? Okay.
But it wasn't that difficult. I mean,
Okay. Okay.
it was the most important thing in my life, to be honest with you.
Gotcha.
Um, and one of the things that this book that I wrote, basically it's a memoir, and I wrote it within 2 to 2.5 years of getting clean and sober, so it was fresh in my mind,
Fresh. Yeah.
and it was really a cathartic exercise just to get my demons out. And I never intended to publish it because it's quite brutally honest. It's not a pretty story. And so I wouldn't publish it, with my daughter, growing up kind of thing. And I was concerned about the collateral damage it might have on my business partners and
Sure.
the name of the business. So I just put it on the shelf and it was just sitting there. And what happened last fall, a friend of mine in recovery who's an addiction counselor that specializes in teen addiction had written a book. It's called What's Wrong with My Teen? And she phoned me and asked me if I would read it and do a review of it. So I did that. And in that process, I got to meet her publisher. And when her publisher heard sort of some of my backstory, like my business career, she said, well, there must be a book in you. And I said, I've got a book, but it's not pretty. And she basically convinced me to publish it. So that's why the book came to be. And before I published, no problem. Before I published it, I checked with my daughter and my friends. She had read it, so it wasn't going to be a shock to her. And I checked with my ex-partners at Slave Country, and they said, no, 30 years have gone by. You're not going to hurt anybody anymore. Like everybody's fine. So that's why I decided to publish it. And the whole purpose is basically to say, addiction can happen to anyone at any time in any part of their life and in any number of ways that you don't expect, because I wasn't planning on being a drug addict. So it can happen to anyone. So it's a cautionary tale. But it's also a tale of hope. And what I tell people who are struggling is that it's never too late to fix your life and get clean and sober. It's just never too late. So it's really a book of hope in terms of, if you can turn your life around, things will be good. Your relationships will get repaired if you work at it. So that's the reason the book is out there.
And it sounds like those lessons are, and you correct me if I'm wrong, one of the reasons why you wanted to be as brutally honest as you were, because it sounds like there's some really key messages that you wanted readers to hear.
Yeah, a lot of I've had a number of people read the book just before it's published, just to get their thought, comments, and suggestions. And what they've told me is that it's a really a truly lived experience sort of memoir. So rather than tell people what happened, basically I wrote it in the first person and in the present tense. So basically people are basically, watching me walk through this whole process from my own perspective.
Yep.
And it's, as I said, it's brutally honest, and it's going to be shocking to a lot of people. But I've had some surprisingly positive comments from folks in the mental health community who said, this is a mental health problem. And I think it's a more common view now that, addiction is a mental health problem, if, as much as anything else. And so I've been.
Gord, would you say that's a misconception about when we talk about addiction?
Yeah, I think historically it's, there's an addict, and, they've got a problem with drugs or alcohol. And what I discovered, the favorite line that in my book is basically when it's quite common amongst us in who have a drug addiction or an alcohol problem, is that there's a few latent mental disorders that come bubbling to the surface after we get clean and sober.
Right.
And unfortunately, I describe that as bubbling to the surface like a fart in a bathtub. And so you just sit there and say, "Oh, I've got clean and sober," and then you say, "Oh, but I'm bipolar. I'm sort of a little bit narcissistic, and I'm self-centered." Right. And so then you've got a whole bunch of other issues that you have to deal with. And I don't know any alcoholic or an addict in recovery who doesn't admit that they've got some mental health issues that they need to deal with. Because if you don't deal with them, you end up relapsing.
I'd love to talk about sort of support systems and having friends. I think you call them angels, to kind of come and aid us through these processes of recovery and getting and healing. Were there any sort of pivotal moments that these angels made a difference for you, or played a pivotal role in your life as part of your journey?
Yeah, I think the most important event was when my business partner, Steve Gunn, when I expected him to blast me, basically said, "What can we do to help?" I was I was in shock, and I was broken down. I was crying, and I couldn't believe that someone, you know, who was just a straight up conservative, you know, business guy, would have that kind of a reaction. And virtually all of the people in my close friends and family and stuff, once I got clean and sober, they said, "Look, we understand, you know, and what can we do to support you going forward?"
Beautiful.
The other sort of key person in my life, when I was in treatment, my early days in treatment were, I was disrupting the norm in your terms.
Sure.
And they basically said, like, you got to straighten out or you're going to have to go, kind of thing. And I'm sitting there saying, I'm going to flunk treatment. Like, you know, the only thing I've ever failed in life is a guidance course in high school, which is sort of ironic. But anyway, so they said, we're going to give you, you know, put you in the care of our senior medical director. And he was known as the guy who dealt with the hard cases. So I got on really, really well with him. And I couldn't bullshit him. He did exactly the right things, asked the right questions.
Yep.
And I had developed a really good relationship with him. So when I relapsed after treatment, when I finally got back, I phoned him and I said, you know, I'm back. And he said, well, I'm glad, but, you know, it's not a surprise that you relapsed. And I said, you know, and he said, do you want to come back to a treatment center? I said, no. I said, I've learned what I can in a treatment center. That's not going to work for me. And he agreed to see me on an individual, like, private practice basis. He was a medical doctor, so it didn't cost me anything. So I saw him once every 2 weeks for the next 5 years. And I credit him really with you know, most of my recovery and my success in recovery, because he kept me on the you know, on the straight and narrow path.
Right. And even having the opportunity to dialogue, right, and be someone to regulate and hold you accountable, right? Because that's a big part of that process.
Yeah. I kept saying, I can't bullshit this guy. Like, I gotta, like, I'm tempted to, but you just couldn't. And again, he'd been around, like, he didn't mess around. Like, you know, the first time I met him in his office in the treatment center, he said, so, like, isn't your ass sore? And I said, like, what are you talking about? He says, well, you must have had golden horseshoes up there for the last 5 years, man. But so he was like that, just direct,
right,
and a great sense of humor. And he,
I can see where that's helpful, that sense of humor. And actually, one of the senses I got, that sense of humor was an important part of your journey or process. I wonder if you could talk about that, how it helped you.
I think the biggest surprise when people started giving me feedback on the book, they said, this is like laugh out loud funny. And I said, well, it wasn't supposed to be, but apparently I've always had a bit of an ironic sense of humor. And I think that just got infused into the book along the way. Right. And there were funny things that happened. And, you know, I had this one interaction, you know, one of my issues, I was divorced when I got, you know, messed up, and I never succeeded in having a long-term romantic relationship ever since I got clean and sober. And one of the issues I was dealing with the psychiatrist was like, you know, why can't I have the kind of relationship that I see other people have? Right. And so we spent a lot of time on that. And I'll tell you a really quick story. After my complaining about it for all, he says, well, have you ever tried internet dating? And I said, no. And he said, well, there's this eHarmony system out there. And I said, oh. So he convinced me to try it. So I said, I'll go on 3 dates. And if nothing happens, then I'm just going to give up. So I went on 3 dates, and I won't tell you all the details, but in effect, they weren't successful. And so I said, fine, like, I'm done. And then when I decided I was done, I got one more contact from eHarmony from this young lady who looked, you know, interesting. I said, well, maybe I'll give it one more try. And so we went back and forth, and it looked really promising. And the only problem was she lived in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. So, and I'd never been to Moose Jaw. So I decided to go out and meet her for the first time. And she had a couple of kids, and she was an independent businesswoman and all this other good stuff. So I go out there, I meet her on the weekend. Good news is she looked exactly like she did, on the internet, because sometimes that doesn't happen.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
I said, well, this is going to work out. So, and we're having dinner the first night, chatting away. And I ended up saying, like, you never told me what kind of business you're in. And I always admire, people who are entrepreneurs and in business for yourself.
Sure.
She says, I'm the only professional dominatrix in Saskatchewan.
And you picked the winner.
And Dr. Cooney, he couldn't stop laughing.
That is funny.
But that didn't work out.
I can understand that. I can understand that. I can understand that. Part of the healing journey, a significant part of the healing journey is forgiveness, and I would say it's really central to healing, and a big part of forgiveness is forgiving yourself first, before others can before you can move forward with others.
Yeah.
What did that process? What did that process of self forgiveness look like for you?
Oh, okay. I think the first step was basically accepting the fact of who I am and what my faults are, but keeping that in perspective in terms of I'm not all bad. There's some good parts about me.
Sure.
So it was becoming probably much more self-aware and developing. I would say much more humility, but I would say some humility, because I didn't have much, because I was on that trajectory in business. I thought I was invincible, which is one of the reasons I got caught by the drug problem. I didn't think anything could knock me down. So it was the self-awareness, and self-awareness can lead to humility. So it's becoming humble in terms of who I am and being thankful for my survival. And I'm not sure I can honestly say I've ever forgiven myself. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about this and talking with people about this. My problem with forgiveness is that it's easy to say you can forgive, for example, someone else who's done you harm in some way. But the problem is you can never forget it. And so the question is, if you can't forget it, is that going to sort of solidify your behavior towards that person? Will you ever give them a second chance, kind of thing? And so it's the same with myself. I'm not sure I can forgive myself, but I certainly won't forget, what I've done and where I've been. And that's my thought on that.
Interesting, and I think it's funny because when I think about that and the aspect of forgetting, I don't think I want to forget, and because I want to know exactly the mistakes I made that got me on the path, and if I don't forget it, and I truly am committed to a life of fulfillment and happiness and satisfaction, by not forgetting also reminds me not to make those same mistakes again.
Yeah.
So that's I guess my when you say that, that's kind of my initial, my mind goes there. I don't want to forget because I don't want to do it again.
Yeah. Yeah. And as I said, it's I've never asked forgiveness from any of my friends who I've harmed along the way. Just because that's not my role. If they can behave however they want, but I shouldn't be asking for that. And another comment I'll make, I had some serious challenges in recovery, like with the 12-step community. I was very committed to it. But one of the common things that I still find disturbing is that a lot of people who've recovered from drugs and alcohol maintain that they were a victim. And, if you believe you're a victim, you're never, ever going to turn your life around. And
Right.
Some people just can never let go of that. My approach is, sure, stuff happened that was outside of your control, but you don't have to let that affect the rest of your life.
Right. Yep. Yep. We could have listeners out there who are struggling in silence, going through their own battles and trying to navigate and figure out their own individual challenges. If there was a message of sort of hope or encouragement to them, what would you say?
The biggest challenge for someone in addiction is is the willingness to ask for help. The problem is you're so full of guilt and shame that you don't believe anyone would help you or would want to help you. And so it's that willingness that's getting to the point where, and usually you have to be desperate. So you've hit a bottom, and there's all sorts of bottoms, but you have to be in a point in your life where you sit there and say, the only way I'm going to live my life ongoing is if I ask for help. That's the only option to me. But the willingness to do that is very difficult for a lot of people to come to, because they're sick. I mean, they're sick with their addiction. So willingness to help, and then finding the right source of help to sort of get you over the edge and back into a different way of life.
Gord, when I think about your story, it really is sort of a testament of it's never too late to heal or find freedom, right? It's never. And I would imagine when you look at life now, and even think about an audacious life, what does that look like to you now? What does that mean to you?
Well, Audacious is putting a memoir out there.
It is a very honest memoir, I would add.
Yes.
That, right?
Yeah. So that's. But again, I've been audacious most of my life. As I said, most of my career choices were high risk, unexpected, opportunistic. So it's not strange territory for me to take a leap of faith. But sorry, I've lost track of your question.
I was saying, what does living an audacious life mean to you now? Yeah.
But basically, it's being honest with people. It's helping people when they ask for help. And one of the things I learned in recovery is when people ask for help, it doesn't matter who they are or what their problem is. You're missing an opportunity to help yourself, but also to help them if you don't help them. So when people ask for help, I offer help, and it's support, it's forgiveness, it's suggestions in terms of what they can do. And I recently had an old friend who I hadn't seen in 15 years sit down with me, track me down, and was saying he just lost his wife, 6 months ago, and he was completely devastated. And I said, what about your friends? He doesn't have any friends. So I said, well, what are you doing? He says, well, I'm not doing anything. And the more I listened to him, I said, man, you need to see a therapist. Like you're about, an inch away from committing suicide here. Like,
right.
And it's the ability to talk to people directly like that. And, basically just trying to help them in the best way that you can. And I think the biggest way that, people like me can help others is to listen to what they're saying. And the other thing I've learned, and it's a really important message, is when you're talking to an addict or an alcoholic, there is no point in asking them why it happened, because they don't know. It's a mystery. You can ask them what happened and let them tell their story. But people who ask me, like, why did you become an addict? And I said, because I'm an addict. Like,
I don't think it was in a menu of options. Let me choose addict. I don't think that was.
But a lot of people, they want to know why. Why did so and so become an addict? We don't know, and don't ask them that question, because it doesn't help. So when people come to me with those kind of questions, they say, why am I an addict? I said, I have no idea, but tell me what happened, then I can share my story, and you might be able to relate to part of it.
Got you. Beyond your book, Cracking Up, what's next for you? There are sort of other stories on the horizon that you've got to share or you're passionate about?
A few people have suggested I continue writing. So I have a website, and what I started to do on my website, I'm posting a blog twice a week that starts with my life in the carnival business. And it tracks basically the lessons I've learned in business along the way. And they're little, 500-word essays. And so that's what I've been doing from a writing point of view. And I still, now that I've been a bit of a recluse for the last 10 years, but this book is, I've had people from high school getting in touch with me. So,
I love it. So
I've become much more engaged socially. And I'm enjoying that process. So just, again, I'm here to help people if I can.
Let's give your that website so people can check you out if they wanted to check out your blog. Where's that?
It's GordonLownds.com.
Okay. And we'll make sure that that's in the contact details in the show notes below, so people can access that as well. One last question, Gord. I got to tell you, like I said, I've had a phenomenal chat with you. This is a great time, and I really appreciate your honesty and candidness throughout this conversation. And I'm wondering if you can give yourself sort of your younger self one piece of advice before your descent into addiction. What would it be?
My younger self. The notion of invincibility is a fallacy. When we believe that, bad things happen in any number of ways. So I got to that point where I had been so successful and everything I had touched had worked out well, but I just didn't think anything could affect me negatively in my life. And it wasn't a conscious thing saying I'm invincible, but it's, in retrospect, clearly that's the way I behaved, and that's the way I handled different situations. It's one of the reasons I was successful in business, because I would take risks that other people wouldn't. But in my personal life, it's not a healthy mindset.
So I guess you're speaking of the power of humility a little bit, what I'm hearing, right? And how important that is to us. Yeah.
And humility, requires you to be self-aware. And I wasn't, because I was running 100 miles an hour doing stuff.
Right. Well, Gord, like I said off the top, it's just phenomenal, first of all, chat to begin with, but just in the manner in which you've been brutally honest. You've told your story, and you've included all the bad. You told your messy story and made sure that you included all the bad parts. And I really do believe there's a great power in that. There's no question. Like I've oftentimes said that when you're going through a challenge or a struggle or what have you, it's so easy to think that you're the only person on the planet that's gone through what you've gone through. And so to hear someone else say, well, actually, you know what? Here's what I've done. But the better part is not only this is what happened to me. Here's how I got out of it. Here's who I relied on. Here's the supports I used. And here's what happened, like relapse. But you know what? Then I came back again. So that encouragement and I hope that it provides just by sharing our stories is so powerful. So I'm very happy that you've done that. And again, I really appreciate the time. And thanks for being a guest on the Audacious Living Podcast.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. I enjoyed the chat.
Thank you, Gord. Back right here on the podcast, man. What an enlightening conversation with Gordon. One of the key takeaways from our discussion is the importance of resilience and the willingness to seek help. His journey serves as a powerful reminder that recovery is not just a personal battle, but a collective journey that thrives on support and understanding. I personally love how Gordon shared his story with such honesty and vulnerability. His insights on humility and self-awareness really resonated with me, and it's a reminder that recognizing our flaws, embracing our humanity is essential for healing and growth. Now, if you'd like to connect with Gord directly, you can find his contact details in the show notes below. He's certainly eager to engage with anyone who might benefit from his experiences and insights. Now, as we conclude today's episode, let's again take a moment to reflect on the analogy of Tulum. Just like the ancient ruins that have endured countless storms, we too can rise from our challenges, rebuild our lives, and find beauty in our journeys. I want to thank you for joining us on this edition of the Audacious Living Podcast. If you found value in today's episode, please take a moment to like, follow, or share to help our community grow. Together, let's continue to inspire one another to live audaciously. Until next time, stay safe, be kind, show love to one another, and be audacious.
Driven by purpose, fueled by passion, my words got power, my thoughts have action, motivation, stay gracious, that's